Have you ever felt like you're always taking up too much space, even when you're silent? Like your very existence was an inconvenience? You walked into rooms and immediately scanned the air, reading emotions that weren't yours to hold, calculating how to shrink before anyone told you to. It wasn't conscious. You didn't sit down one day and decide to become invisible, but slowly, over time, you learned the rules. Don't laugh too loudly. Don't ask for too much. Don't take up time. Don't speak if you're not sure it's safe. Don't cry unless it's quiet. Don't want anything unless it won't hurt anyone else. You weren't born small. You were taught to become small, because that was the only way to stay safe. And now here you are grown, but still folding yourself into shapes that fit someone else's comfort zone. Still mistaking peace for not being a problem. Still calling it love when it feels like erasure. But here's the truth. Survival is not the same as living. You were never meant to shrink yourself just to make others feel big. And no matter how many times they applauded your silence, it was never meant to be your song. This video is for the part of you that stayed quiet for too long, for the version of you that learned to survive by disappearing, and now wonders why you feel invisible even when you're trying your hardest. If that's you, stay, because what you're about to hear might sound like someone finally saw through the mask you've been wearing. You're not broken, you're just exhausted from carrying the weight of who you had to become. And slowly, gently, we'll start to unfold that weight together. Let's begin. And if this already feels like something you've carried in your chest for far too long, consider subscribing and sharing this with someone else who's been quietly hurting too. Sometimes healing doesn't start with answers. It starts with being understood. They praised you when you didn't cry, when you didn't speak up, when you didn't need help, when you were easy, quiet, polite. They called it mature. They called you so strong for your age. But they weren't praising your strength. They were praising your silence, your self-abandonment, your early compliance. They applauded the version of you that didn't make waves because it made their lives easier. And you, desperate to belong, to be good, to be loved, learned to play along. You swallowed your anger, hid your sadness, bit your tongue even when it trembled with the weight of truth. You smiled when it hurt. You apologized when you didn't do anything wrong. You learned to anticipate disappointment before it arrived, so at least it wouldn't take you by surprise. And somewhere along the way, you began to call this love. You told yourself that if you were smaller, softer, easier, maybe you wouldn't be left. Maybe you wouldn't be blamed. Maybe they'd finally stay. But they weren't staying for you. They were staying for the version of you that didn't ask for anything. And now, you don't know who you are without the shrinking. You don't know how to speak without fear. You don't know how to stand still in a room without analyzing everyone's temperature before deciding if it's safe to breathe. You were trained to be small, and now the world applauds you for your humility, for your peaceful energy, for how unproblematic you are. But inside, you're screaming, because shrinking is loud when it happens every day. You just do it quietly. You do it when you agree just to keep the conversation calm. You do it when you minimize your dreams so they won't seem too much. You do it when you love people who drain you because leaving feels selfish. You even do it in front of the mirror, telling yourself you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too emotional, just like they said. And you wonder why your chest feels tight all the time, why you feel invisible in your relationships, why even your victories feel like survival instead of celebration. It's not that you're ungrateful, it's that you're still trying to be who they needed, not who you are. And the scariest part? You got so good at hiding, you don't know if there's anything left to reveal. But they're island. They're always island. You just haven't had someone tell you that your fullness isn't a threat, that your voice doesn't have to echo off the walls alone, that you don't have to keep auditioning for love that only applauds you when you disappear. You were not born to be palatable. You were not made to be consumed. You are allowed to take up space not with apology but with presence. You're allowed to say, "This hurts," and not be punished. You're allowed to cry and still be seen as whole. And you're allowed to stop performing strength for a world that never asked how much it cost you. This isn't about blame. This is about truth. And truth is, you've been shrinking for so long. You've forgotten what expansion feels like. But your body remembers. Your soul remembers. That aching in your chest, that lump in your throat, that's not weakness. That's the sound of yourself knocking, asking to be let back in. There was a time you believed that silence was safety, that if you could just be easy enough, quiet enough, small enough, no one would hurt you. No one would leave. No one would break what was left of your already fractured sense of worth. And in many ways, you were right. Being invisible did keep you safe. It kept the yelling away. It kept the disappointment out. It kept the fists from flying, whether literal or emotional. But survival is clever like that. It doesn't care what it costs you. It just cares that you make it out. And so you did. But now you're standing in a life you built from survival. And everything feels thin, distant, hollow. Even joy feels secondhand, like it's happening to someone else. Because somewhere deep inside, you still believe you're not supposed to be seen. You still apologize when someone bumps into you. You still say I'm fine when you're anything but. You still carry the weight of other people's moods like they're your fault to fix, because you were trained to be the peacekeeper, the fixer, the quiet one. And when you weren't that, you were punished. With cold shoulders, with guilt, with withdrawal of love disguised as discipline. So of course you learned the choreography. Smile when it hurts. Nod when you disagree. Make yourself smaller so no one else feels threatened. And the worst part, it worked. They loved you more when you were less. So now, even as an adult, some part of you still believes that being more will make people leave. That speaking your needs makes you selfish. That choosing yourself means abandoning everyone else. So you keep shrinking. You shrink when you tell someone, no worries, it's okay. Even when you're crying inside. You shrink when you don't correct them for mispronouncing your name, or mislabeling your feelings, or misjudging your worth. You shrink when you over-explain, over-apologize, over-function because somewhere you still think love must be earned. You shrink when you love people who don't see you, because the familiarity of neglect feels safer than the risk of real intimacy. And I know what you're thinking. You're wondering if it's too late, if you've shrunk for too long, if anyone will still recognize you when you stop folding, if there's anything left under the mask. But let me tell you something you may not have heard enough. The parts of you that are loud, messy, real, they're not too much. They're just yours. And reclaiming them doesn't make you dangerous. It makes you whole. You don't owe anyone your disappearance. You don't have to keep playing the role that made others comfortable at your own expense. You can speak and still be loved. You can cry and still be worthy. You can change and still belong. Because the truth is, real love doesn't require shrinking. It doesn't ask you to trade honesty for harmony. It doesn't call your pain inconvenient. It sits with you in the discomfort. It listens when it's hard. It stays. Even when you're not easy. You were taught to survive by becoming invisible. But now it's time to live by becoming real. Somewhere along the way, too much became your worst fear. Too sensitive, too emotional, too intense, too complicated. They said it like a curse. Like if you didn't tone it down, you'd end up alone. Like if you showed too much of who you are, people would back away slowly, afraid of your depth, your honesty, your truth. So you adapted. You made your voice smaller, your dreams quieter, your sadness prettier. You learned how to cry without making a sound, how to hurt without showing it, how to long for more without asking. Because asking always came with a price. A sigh, a cold stare, a sarcastic comment, sometimes worse, withdrawal, silence. The kind of silence that teaches a child not to speak again. So you stopped reaching. You stopped expecting people to meet you where you are. And you started building a self out of fragments, bits and pieces of who you thought you had to be to stay loved. But the cost, it's all over your life. It's in the way you struggle to make decisions because you were never allowed to trust your own voice. It's in the way you second-guess every text you send, every sentence you say, wondering if you came off wrong, if you asked for too much. It's in the way you downplay your accomplishments so no one feels small around you, even though you were made to feel small your whole life. It's in your relationships where you give and give and give and call it love, even when it hurts, even when you're the only one bleeding, because love to you has always meant endurance, holding on, holding in, holding back. You don't even notice you're doing it anymore. It's just who you became. But what if I told you the real you, the one beneath all that shrinking, is not too much at all? What if you're exactly the right amount for the people who are capable of love that doesn't require erasure? What if the reason you feel empty is not because you're broken, but because you've been performing your way through a life that never made space for your fullness? And now your soul is starving for truth, not the kind of truth that needs to be proven, the kind that just island, The truth that you have always been worthy before you were useful, before you were quiet, before you were palatable. And that the real healing, it doesn't begin when someone finally sees you. It begins when you do, when you stop shrinking to avoid being abandoned, when you stop apologizing for existing, when you stop making everyone else comfortable at the cost of your own suffocation. You were never meant to be a shadow in your own life. You were meant to stand in your light, not to prove anything, not to perform, but simply because your presence matters. You don't need to earn air. You don't need to be lovable to deserve breath. You're here. That's enough. You learned to apologize for things that weren't your fault, for your tears, for your silence, for needing time, for needing anything. You became so used to anticipating other people's reactions that you forgot what it felt like to respond to your own needs first. You know how to read the room before you know how to read yourself. You know how to soothe others' chaos before you know how to calm your own. And people, they call you kind, empathic, compassionate, selfless. But the truth? Sometimes your kindness is a shield. Sometimes your empathy is a wound, because you've been pouring from a cup that's been empty for years. And nobody ever told you that boundaries aren't betrayals. That no can be a complete sentence. That I don't like that doesn't make you difficult. That wanting to be heard doesn't make you demanding. That showing pain doesn't make you weak. That saying you're tired doesn't mean you failed. You were just never taught that being whole isn't selfish. You were only taught how to disappear beautifully. How to make pain look poetic. How to keep loving people who've never even asked you what you need. So now, even in your best moments, there's a shadow, a quiet ache that says you still don't belong, not because no one wants you, but because you've spent so long editing yourself that you no longer know what belonging truly means. Belonging isn't being liked, it's being known, fully, messily, authentically. And when the only version of you that people love is the version you crafted to make them stay, you're not being loved, you're being tolerated. And that's a slow kind of death. The kind that doesn't break you all at once, just a little more each day, until you wake up one morning in a life that technically works, but feels like a haunting. The job is fine, the relationship is good, the friendships are supportive, and yet you feel alone in rooms full of people because you're still wearing the mask, the one that smiles, the one that says, I'm okay, the one that knows how to be exactly what they want. But who are you when no one's looking? Do you even recognize her? Do you even trust her voice anymore? Or have you trained yourself so well to perform survival that living feels like rebellion? You were taught to shrink so you wouldn't be left. But now you're disappearing anyway, piece by piece, smile by smile, compromise by compromise. And the truth is, you can't keep losing yourself in rooms that were never meant to hold all of you. You were not made to live halfway. You were not born to be beige. You are meant to be seen. And if they turn away when they finally do, let them. Because the ones who stay, they won't ask you to dim the light just to feel warm. There's a certain kind of silence that isn't peace. It's the kind that buzzes in your bones. The kind that feels like holding your breath under a smile. The kind that looks calm from the outside, but inside, you're bracing for impact. You've lived in that silence for so long, it became your language. A silence that says, don't rock the boat. Don't make them uncomfortable. Don't bring it up. It'll only cause more trouble. And so you learned how to stay quiet even when you were breaking. Because somewhere deep inside, a part of you still believes that love is fragile, that if you speak your truth, it will leave. You were taught that love is earned through compliance, not authenticity. That peace means pretending. That love means pleasing. That worth is measured by how little space you take up. And so now, when someone asks you what you need, you freeze. Because no one ever asked you that before. Because you don't know. Because for so long, your only need was to be needed, to be easy, to be wanted, to be anything but a burden. You were trained to put others first. But no one taught you how to come home to yourself. No one told you that boundaries are not walls. That your needs are not too much. That your voice shaky, raw, uncertain is still holy. But let me say it now. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to need reassurance, to need comfort, to need someone to stay even when you're not performing the role of low-maintenance angel. You are allowed to be human. And anyone who punishes you for your humanity was never offering love in the first place. Only conditions, only control, only a contract disguised as care. But here's what they can't take from you: your right to reclaim the pieces you buried, the messy ones, the loud ones, the passionate ones, the inconvenient, radiant, untamed ones. You don't need to explain why you're tired. You don't need to justify your tears. You don't need permission to exist exactly as you are. There is no gold medal for how well you suffered in silence, no trophy for how little you asked for, no prize for how invisible you made yourself just to keep the peace. There is only this moment, this breath, this quiet awareness that you don't want to live like this anymore. You want to be known. You want to be held, not for your usefulness, but for your essence. And that doesn't make you needy. It makes you real. Some people will only love the version of you that doesn't ask for anything. The one who nods, who agrees, who forgives quickly, even when no apology came, who makes excuses for their neglect and calls it empathy. They'll call you mature because you don't confront. They'll call you understanding because you keep the peace. They'll call you strong because you carry more than anyone should have to. But strength isn't the absence of pain, and peace isn't the absence of conflict. Sometimes, peace is a scream you've buried for years. And sometimes, strength is finally whispering, "I'm not okay." But the world doesn't always reward that. Because when you stop shrinking, when you say, "That hurt," or "That's not okay," or "I need more than this," the people who benefited from your silence will call you selfish. They'll say you've changed. And they're right. You have changed. You're no longer willing to carry other people's guilt just to make them feel better about how they treated you. You're no longer willing to trade your truth for proximity. You're no longer willing to be loved only when you're convenient. And it hurts. God, it hurts. Because no one tells you that healing feels a lot like grieving. Grieving the version of you that kept everyone happy. Grieving the relationships that only worked when you didn't. Grieving the illusion that if you were just good enough, they'd stay. But they didn't stay, and maybe that's not your failure. Maybe that's the first sign that you're finally choosing yourself. Not because you're bitter, not because you're angry, but because you're tired of being applauded for disappearing. And now you're ready to exist on purpose, to speak when it shakes, to say no, even when your voice trembles, to stop editing yourself to fit into places that were never made for the real you. This kind of becoming, it's not loud, it's not glamorous, it doesn't come with applause. It comes in quiet moments when you look in the mirror and choose not to criticize, when you feel lonely, but still don't go back to what broke you, when you tell the truth and let the silence fall where it may. And it's there, in that silence, that something new begins to grow. Not the survival version of you, not the performance, not the mask, but you. The one who never needed to be small to be safe. The one who never had to be invisible to be loved. The one who has always been worthy, just hidden beneath layers of fear. You don't have to earn your space anymore. You are allowed to be whole, even if it makes others uncomfortable. Because you're healing, it isn't just for you. It's a permission slip for everyone still waiting to feel seen. You spent so long studying other people's moods, watching for the twitch in the brow, the shift in tone, the sigh that meant you did something wrong even if they said nothing at all. You learned to decode the unsaid, to read between the lines, to feel the energy in a room before a single word was spoken. It made you intuitive, empathic, hyper-aware, but it also made you anxious. Because when your safety depends on how quickly you can adjust to someone else's feelings, you stop trusting your own. You don't know if you're sad or if someone else silent. You don't know if you're angry or just mirroring the tension in the air. You don't know what you want. Only what will keep things calm. That's not peace. That's conditioning. And it's not your fault. You were trained to prioritize everyone's comfort over your own truth. To be agreeable even when you disagreed. To smile even when your soul was sinking. To nod even when you were screaming inside. And now you're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind of tired that comes from self-erasure, from constantly asking yourself, did I say too much? Did I ask for too much? Did I feel too much? And somewhere inside, the fear still lingers that if you show up fully, someone will walk away. That if you need something, you'll be a burden. That if you take up space, there won't be enough room for love. But you need to hear this. You were never too much. You were just around people who didn't know how to hold you. They didn't know how to stay when the tears came. They didn't know how to listen without trying to fix. They didn't know how to love someone with depth because they hadn't touched their own. But that doesn't mean you're unlovable. It means you're real, and being real in a world that rewards performance, that's radical. You don't owe anyone a watered-down version of yourself. You don't need to shrink to be lovable. You don't need to be agreeable to be safe. You don't need to disappear to be accepted. You are allowed to exist in full volume, to take up space in rooms that once made you feel invisible, to speak words that tremble with truth, to say this is who I am without flinching. The people who matter won't ask you to shrink. They'll lean in, they'll listen, they'll say, I see you, and mean it. But before they do, you have to see you, not the mask, not the performance, not the version of you that kept everyone comfortable, but the real you, the one who's been waiting so long to come home. Coming home to yourself isn't dramatic. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not loud. It's not a single moment of clarity with swelling music in the background. It's quiet, awkward, sometimes painful. It happens when you pause before saying I'm fine and ask yourself if you actually are. When you notice that you're clenching your jaw just because someone else in the room is upset. When you catch yourself over-explaining something simple just to avoid being misunderstood. It's subtle, like choosing to take a deep breath instead of jumping in to rescue someone from their own discomfort. Like not laughing at the joke that made you feel small. Like saying I need a moment when your chest tightens and you don't know why. That's the work. That's what healing looks like. Not perfection, not being endlessly graceful, not suddenly becoming high vibrational or positive all the time. Just presence. With yourself, with your feelings, with the parts of you that are still learning it's okay to be here. The parts that were told to sit down and stay quiet, that were only praised when they were helpful, or pretty, or convenient. They don't need more punishment. They need your patience, because unlearning takes time. Your nervous system doesn't trust freedom yet. Your body still believes that being small kept you alive. And in some ways, it did. But now you're safe enough to choose something else. To take up the space you never gave yourself before. To listen to the ache beneath your people-pleasing. To recognize that fear of abandonment isn't proof you're unworthy. It's just a shadow of the child who was left emotionally hungry. You are not that child anymore. You can soothe them now. Not by disappearing, not by silencing their pain, but by staying. Staying when it's messy, staying when you're misunderstood, staying when the voices say, this is dangerous, because those voices aren't your truth. They're echoes of a time when you had to shrink to survive, of a story that told you love had to be earned through suffering. But you don't have to carry that story anymore. You're allowed to write a new one where your voice isn't too loud, your needs aren't too big, your boundaries aren't rejection, they're rescue. And if someone walks away when you stop performing, let them. They were never clapping for you. They were clapping for the character you played to stay loved. But now the curtain is down, and the real you is stepping forward, not to entertain, not to please, but to exist, fully, freely, finally. And maybe that's what you feared all along, that once you stopped performing, they'd leave. That once you said, this is who I am, it would be too much. That once you stopped bending, the love would vanish. But here's what no one told you. When love leaves because you got honest, it was never love. It was control wrapped in affection, approval dressed up as intimacy, tolerance mistaken for connection. Real love doesn't shrink when you grow. It doesn't flinch when you cry. It doesn't punish you for having needs, emotions, depth. Real love leans in. It stays through the shaking voice, the tangled words, the moments when your truth doesn't fit neatly into their comfort. And even if you haven't met that kind of love yet, you can start by giving it to yourself. Not in the way self-help slogans suggest, not with bubble baths and affirmations, but with raw, radical honesty. The kind where you admit, I'm tired of pretending. I don't know who I am without the mask. I want more than survival. The kind where you stop managing everyone else's feelings and finally sit with your own. That's the beginning. Not loud, not pretty, but honest. And it's in that honesty, raw, trembling, inconvenient, that your real life begins. Not the one built on shrinking, but the one where you return to yourself, where you stop waiting to be chosen by people who only love your silence, where you stop contorting to fit into their limited idea of who you should be, where you stop apologizing for being whole, because there's a version of you waiting beneath the edits. The one who laughed too loud, who cried openly, who wanted things deeply, who believed love didn't have to hurt. That version didn't vanish. She's just been waiting for permission, not from them, from you. And now you give it. You don't wait to be rescued. You don't wait to be understood by those who never tried. You don't wait for someone to come along and say you're allowed to be this much. You look in the mirror, you meet your own eyes, and you say, I see you, I hear you, I'm not leaving you again. Because this time, you're not shrinking, you're returning. To the truth, to your voice, to the version of you that was never too much, just too real for a world addicted to pretending. And when you come home to that version, you don't just survive, you live. You breathe without apology, you speak without permission, you love without conditions. And the silence, the one that used to feel like punishment, now it feels like freedom because it's finally yours.